Welcome to the Church Basement. I'm Andy. This is part 3 of a series of videos looking at something called the shame cycle. If you haven't watched part 1 or 2, those videos are linked in the description. In this video, we're looking at examples of how people might get stuck in the shame cycle and what it looks like to break the cycle. Now, these are not specific people I know. It's all made up. But I do know many people who think, believe, and act in many of the ways I describe, and that includes myself. I can relate, and I'm sure you can too, and that's because shame is universal, and many of the ways we respond are typical. Quick refresher, shame drives us towards isolation, hiding, and disconnecting. We feel uncomfortable, we believe lies, we think all sorts of craziness, and we respond to what is going on inside us by trying to feel better about ourselves, to counter the accusations by proving ourselves or measuring up, or by numbing it all together. In our attempt to deal with shame, we typically find ourselves feeling no different, maybe even worse. It's a nasty cycle. So here are some examples of what this might look like. Kelly is a freshman in college. She's excited about this new phase in life, but there is something else that she is feeling. On the outside, people think Kelly has it all together because she typically is succeeding at whatever she does. She checks many of the boxes that make her friends, her family, people in general believe she's doing great, enjoying life, and is succeeding. But deep down, there is a growing feeling of inadequacy. For Kelly, college isn't easy. She's not enjoying any of the classes related to her major, and she is worried that she made a mistake and has some serious doubts. She worries that her parents will be disappointed that she feels this way. She worries about how she's going to do in these specific classes and that she might have to find a new major, but she can't imagine a different path in life. She believes her future is at stake, and she is on the verge of failure. She starts to turn to others to give her a sense of validation. She finds relief in attention and the status that she starts to enjoy around campus. She starts to get a picture in her mind of who she ought to be and the acceptance she'd get from being that way. It takes her mind off the dread of failure. She starts making choices that don't align with her values. She feels fake sometimes, but she also finds relief and escape from the dread. It's confusing. When she visits home, though, she feels like a hypocrite, visiting church, seeing friends from youth group. She believes if people knew what she was doing, thinking, how she was acting, her friends would want nothing to do with her, and her parents would be really upset. She tends to swing back and forth between doubling down on her coursework and then escaping the fear of failure in her social life. She doesn't like how this is going. She doesn't like who she thinks she is, who she pretends to be. She's tired, she's burnt out, she's exhausted. She feels alone and down. She feels defeated. Another example, Jared. Jared is in his 20s. He survived college, barely, but now is a new Christian thanks to some friends who loved him and ministered to him. He spent the past 20-some years of his life being what people call rebellious. He had nothing to do with religion or church his whole life, and while in college, really the only thing that he cared at getting better at was beer pong. Guilty. But now he's discovered the gospel and is truly impacted by what God has done for him. He believes God loves him and has forgiven him. To Jared, it's great because he had a lot of guilt about how he had lived his life. So he starts diving into Bible studies, serving opportunities, volunteering at church, and listens to all the podcasts. He becomes more conscious of his actions, his habits, things he says. He wants to change, and he vows to change and become more like Jesus. But Jared struggles. He wonders what he's doing wrong, what he doesn't believe, what he doesn't know. So he doubles down on doing better. He reads more. He listens to more podcasts and sermons. He decides maybe he ought to find a more serious church. His isn't challenging him enough. He wants to be around more serious people who might hold him more accountable. He takes this path, but eventually he still feels like he is just a failure at following Jesus. He won't talk to anyone about his struggles, though, because he feels too ashamed and that the church will think less of him. He feels somewhat better about himself when he's volunteering and doing, quote-unquote, more good. But he just can't shake this feeling of inadequacy that stays with him, and sometimes he even hates himself. Last example, John. John is a husband and a dad. He struggles with a lot of the things that men struggle with. He has a tendency to work too much. Either he spends extra hours at the office, or at home he is in his head and he's not present with his family. He wishes he was more present at home, but work is important, and honestly, he feels more important and valued at work anyways. This creates some tension at home with his wife. In general, when he's at home, he feels somewhat useless with the kids, who are 5 and 3. And he also feels unloved by his wife, who seems in general just mad at him. He doesn't know what to do. He's generally unhappy about the situation at home and feels even worse when he goes to places like church or school events, where every couple seems to have things figured out and every family looks happy. Since these feelings started getting stronger, John finds himself drinking more often and gravitating towards stronger and stronger drinks, even sometimes hiding liquor bottles so his wife doesn't find out. He doesn't like that he's drinking as often as he does, but he thinks it isn't a real problem because his own dad was an alcoholic and he doesn't act like him. Along with all this, John has a secret struggle that nobody else knows about. His whole life, he has struggled on and off with using pornography. He hates it at times, but rationalizes it since his marriage is so bad. He remembers when it seemed like it was something that was under control, but now with the way things are, the temptation seems to be worse and more frequent. John is mostly ashamed of the man he turned out to be and feels stuck and hopeless to do anything about it. In all these examples, to varying degrees, these people are stuck in the shame cycle, trying to work their way out of their feelings through all sorts of methods that were covered in part 1 of these videos. So let's go through step by step what it would look like to start breaking the cycle in each of these examples. First, if you want to break the shame cycle, you need to spot the shame. With each example, there is a sense of inadequacy, feeling unwanted, unloved, not respected, not good enough. Some sense of accusation, whether it's true or it's perceived, that they have fallen short of who they ought to be. Our college student Kelly can't meet all the expectations and feels like a failure and a disappointment. Our new believer Jared can't seem to meet his own expectations for following Jesus. He feels like a failure because he's not changing, not growing. There's a sense of condemnation. Our husband and dad John feels like a failure at home and he wants to escape to work. He hates himself for avoiding his family and for his behaviors around alcohol and pornography. You have to be able to recognize shame and acknowledge it to break the cycle. This is something we learn to do with practice, from the help of God and other people. For many of us, we're so used to ignoring shame by immediately covering it with something, we often miss the opportunity to consciously deal with it. Shame expresses itself in many ways, but you can usually spot it by asking yourself questions like this. Are you feeling small, guilty, broken, inadequate, not good enough, or unloved? Do you sense a need to hide, to shut down, to escape, or to prove yourself because of these feelings? Do you dislike or even hate yourself? If you find yourself answering yes, you are feeling and experiencing shame. We recognize the shame. Next, we start to make connections we talked about in part 2, breaking the shame cycle. We connect to ourselves, truth and reality, others, and God. The moment we recognize that we're experiencing shame, we need to stop and pay attention to what is going on inside us and answer these types of questions. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? What am I believing? For Kelly, I'm anxious because I can't do enough and everything I do seems to not be good enough. I'm ashamed of pretending to be someone I'm not, and if people truly knew me, they would be disappointed. For Jared, I'm frustrated that I'm not growing or changing even though I'm doing all the things I think I should be doing. I'm not the Christian I should be. God must be disappointed in me. For John, I'm feeling guilt and shame over my lack of enthusiasm at home and my desire to escape my family through work, through drinking, and through porn. I'm stuck. I feel hopeless, like God has abandoned me to this life. We identify the story we're telling ourselves and what it's doing to us. This is what it looks like to connect to ourselves. Then we connect to truth and reality. Because shame influences our thoughts and beliefs, we need to purposefully and intentionally align our thoughts and beliefs with what's true rather than the accusations from shame. When we connect to truth and reality, we ask questions like, what happened? Why do I feel the way I feel? What truth do I need to believe? Quick note, this was extremely challenging for me to figure out why I felt the way I felt. I was able to overcome this hurdle with counseling. My counselor was able to poke around my brain and ask me questions and help me discover what I felt and why I felt it. This usually involves understanding childhood and family of origin issues and all the dysfunctional ways that we tend to think. So we need someone else's help. Okay, back to our examples and connecting to truth. Kelly recognizes she is being driven more by fear than by an eagerness to learn. She sees she's gravitating more towards people she can please by pretending rather than gravitating towards people who actually like her for her. She recognizes the shame that underlines all of this and starts to understand she has always been afraid of feeling shame, but she has always been able to cover it with people-pleasing, performance, and perfectionism. One of the messages she realizes that she adopted as a child was meeting expectations equals being accepted and loved. And this stuck with her, but now in college, she's realizing she cannot meet all the expectations the way she always had. She starts to connect the dots to the gospel and gains more appreciation for God's love now that she understands in a new way that she can't meet expectations that she puts on herself or that other people put on her. She remembers what's true. She is loved and accepted by God no matter what, and whatever happens with college, her major, her career path, God is in control, His will is good, and she is okay, even if she isn't feeling okay. Kelly has connected to herself, the reality of her situation, and the truth she needs to believe. Jared, on the advice of his friends who helped him come to faith, starts counseling, where he learns how to understand his feelings, especially shame. He starts to see that he never actually dealt with the shame of his past experiences and the wounds that he carries with him. While he believes in Jesus and His grace, he still sees God as a father who is disappointed in him. His sense of shame and condemnation have been motivating factors, driving him to become religious, hoping to counter the shame rather than heal the old wounds, fully embrace God's forgiveness, and see God as a perfect father rather than view God through the lens of his earthly parents, who were always disappointed because of the choices he was making. Jared realizes in these moments he needs to remember he cannot live up to God's standards, and that isn't how he gets close to God. He needs to trust God's unconditional love and forgiveness and see that God doesn't want a religion, He wants a relationship. God doesn't expect Jared to follow Jesus on his own, but by His grace and with the help of His Spirit. Jared has connected to himself, the reality of his situation, and the truth that he needs to believe. John seeks out help through 12-step groups for addiction, and his sponsor recommends getting into couples counseling with his wife. He starts to realize almost all of his problems start with how he's avoiding shame. He understands that the shame and the guilt he feels is all connected to his behaviors around porn, alcohol, and work addiction. He accepts that these behaviors are wrong and harmful and lead him to feeling stuck. He comes to believe that all three are drugs that he uses to check out and are never good for him. He realizes that what he senses as God's abandonment is related to feeling abandoned as a child. He recognizes his reaction is to isolate and then escape. He reminds himself that God truly loves him and accepts him even as an addict, and that when he feels the worst is when he needs God the most. John has connected with himself, his situation, and the truth that he needs to believe. Aside from connecting to what's going on in us, what's happened to us, what's going on around us, the truth that we need to connect to the most is the gospel. The gospel is the ultimate truth that helps us deal with our shame by telling us we are loved and we are accepted in Jesus no matter what. There is nothing we can do to earn it, and there is nothing we can do to lose it. The gospel also frees us to look at ourselves openly and honestly because we are forgiven and we are accepted and we are loved. It enables us by giving us confidence in our value and acceptance from God to bring our shame into the light and make our next connection, which is connecting to others. Because shame has more influence and power over us when hidden and kept secret, we bring it into the light by sharing it with others. I think the biggest question here isn't necessarily what do we share, because for all our examples, Kelly, Jared, and John, they would basically just rehash as honestly and openly as they can what they're experiencing, what they're feeling, what's happening, the lies they're believing, the truth they're trying to believe, all of that. The big question really is, when this is new to us, how do we share this stuff and with who? First, let's answer the who question. You should share your stuff with people who are safe. Safe people respond with grace, acceptance, understanding, and empathy. Ideally, you should have relationships with safe people, but that's not always the case. So you need to seek out relationships with safe people who can handle your stuff. A counselor is safe and 12-step groups are safe. And both of those, for people like me, are the first place that we are able to actually share our stuff. The goal should be to have safe friends who you can tell anything to. Unfortunately, we have to find these people. And we have to determine if they're safe by opening up and gauging their response. Are they gracious, empathetic, understanding, and accepting of me being this real and this honest? You don't get to choose who these people are necessarily. They become apparent when you open up and they respond appropriately. Second, how do we connect with others? The more personal you can make this, the better. If you can talk to someone face to face, that is ideal. When you can share your stuff and you can see their reaction, no condemnation, no judgment on their face, it tangibly diminishes the feelings of shame that you are going through because you're experiencing grace. Again, this is why counselors and 12-step groups are so helpful. So we're going to meet face to face, that's ideal. But we can't just wait around for 3 weeks till our next coffee date. If I'm overwhelmed and feeling shame today, so my advice is to make a call. Establish with your people, I'm going to call when I need to. And if you're unavailable, that's fine. I'll just leave a message. You don't even have to call me back. Now, this might sound ridiculous. Use a phone? Leave a voicemail? What is this, 2002? But here's the deal. It is more effective to say out loud something that is going on regarding shame. Texting and emailing can be great ways to get things out if you need to. But we need feedback from someone, which is most effective when we can see it because we can experience it. So for our examples, Kelly, Jared, and John, they would reach out to people in their support network and they would share what they have uncovered. Literally, they would tell someone because being known by others diminishes shame's power. This is how we connect to others. Next, we basically take all that we have uncovered from connecting to ourselves, truth, reality, and others, and we connect with God. What we feel is always an invitation to connect with God and others. Shame specifically provides a very important opportunity to connect with God and find forgiveness, love, and grace and help with dealing with any wrongs related to our shame, but also to seek wisdom and comfort in navigating a messy world that is tainted with brokenness. And while this is the last piece of connection I bring up in this video, connecting to God really ought to be part of the entire process. So it might go something like this. For example, God, help me spot the shame today when it pops up. Help me understand why I feel the way I feel. Give me perspective to see what is going on in me and what is going on around me. Remind me of what is true, what you have done, who you are, who I am. Give me courage to connect with others, to be honest, to be open. As we connect with ourselves, truth, and others, we can be connecting with God as well, doing the process with Him. Also, by the end of this process, we should have a lot more clarity about what is going on in us and around us, which helps us know what to ask God for and what we might need help with. So using our examples, here's what that could look like. God, help me remember that I am loved, that there's nothing I can do to earn your love or nothing I can do to lose your love. Forgive me of my sins. Give me wisdom and guidance to do what I need to do. Help me forgive my parents, anyone who's wronged me. Make it clear who my true friends are and who can help me. Help me set appropriate boundaries in my relationships. Heal my marriage. Heal my wounds I've been carrying around all my life. We wouldn't be asking for these things if we were still trying to counter and numb our shame. So you can sort of see, and I hope you experience as you practice all this, that being more connected to ourselves, others, truth, and reality, it all helps us connect to God. Okay, finally, after doing the work of connection, we respond appropriately. This is where we do the good, right, wise, and healthy thing from a place of having worked through our shame. The question is, what should you do now? And life is more complex than the examples I came up with. And even if you're in like a similar situation, I'm not saying this is the right thing to do. I'm just saying this is what it might look like. For Kelly, maybe she realizes she needs to have a better support network around her. True friends who really know her and can help her when she feels pressure towards perfectionism or performance. She asked several friends if they'd be willing to be available more often for honest conversations, And she sets some strict boundaries around her social activities that tend to bring out the worst in her decision making. She plans to drive home soon and have a conversation with her parents to let them know how she feels, how she's always felt, and that she's unhappy with this path that she's on. She's going to tell them she's planning to stop taking courses related to this major and just take general courses until she has a better idea of what she wants to study. She understands her parents may not take the news well, but she is going to ask for support. This is how Kelly responds to having worked through her shame. For Jared, he also realizes he needs a better support network. He reaches out and sets some times to get together with some other guys and lets them know just what's going on, hoping he can find a handful who will be safe and supportive. He creates a daily routine in the morning to connect to what is true, mostly around the gospel, to help him deal with his general sense of guilt and shame and condemnation. He realizes there are people in his past who he needs to forgive and also seek forgiveness. He sets a meeting with his pastor to get guidance on how to do this. When shame bubbles up for him, he reaches out to a friend for a quick chat to get things out, and then he says a prayer after the call. And John realizes he has a serious problem with alcohol, porn, and work, and he starts working with a counselor and committing to attending 12-step groups regularly. He dedicates time each morning to being more connected to himself and to truth and is working through the steps with a sponsor. He decides to have a conversation with his boss about boundaries that he needs in life. He is willing to commit to do his best work during his hours, but he cannot do any more than that. He accepts it might lead to trouble, but he trusts that God is in control and his will is good. John talks more with his wife about what he's feeling and thinking. They have weekly times dedicated to getting current with each other. This is the scariest thing for him, but he follows his counselor's advice and practices being more open and more honest. They are working through their problems. When shame bubbles up for John, he connects with others immediately over the phone, and then he prays afterwards, typically the Serenity Prayer. So this is what it looks like to respond to shame in a helpful way rather than a harmful way. So I believe that shame is more than just a feeling. It's an experience that is part of the human condition, and we all experience it. God, in his wisdom, has decided to let us experience it. Why? Well, I believe shame creates an opportunity for us to trust him more deeply, embrace his grace, and take steps that ultimately are good for us and glorify him. Yes, we can find relief from shame by breaking the shame cycle. Yes, we can live healthier lives. We can have better relationships. Those are all good things. But the best thing is how breaking the cycle through connection affects our relationship and dependence on God. So some questions to consider. What did you relate to? How do you react to shame? What do you think is the most challenging piece of all of this? What element of connection scares you the most? What was the most helpful piece in all of this? Leave a comment. Let me know where you're at. Let me know what was helpful, what was confusing, or maybe you need some clarification on, or let me know an area that you'd like me to dig deeper into. Also, do you have a support network? Send them these videos and start planning out how you can rely on each other to stay more connected and deal with shame and grow together. Well, that is it for the Shame Cycle videos. I hope they were helpful, and I really appreciate you sticking around till the end. If you like this content, you can always subscribe and like the videos, but what I'd really appreciate is if you'd share it with people you think would benefit. My mission is to create resources that help people live more faithfully, so sharing this would be a big help. Thanks.